Good morning, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 51st Dhammapariyesanā episode. Today, we'll be discussing about mindfulness, especially in the context of ancient and contemporary context. So, I'm delighted to be joined by a special guest, Dr. Belinda Khong. I'm very pleased to welcome her to participate this platform here. Let me paraphrase Dr. Belinda's bio a little bit. Dr. Belinda Khong practiced as an attorney before moving into psychology. She holds a doctorate in psychology from Macquarie University, Sydney, Australia, where her research focused on the role of responsibility in Buddhist psychology. Heidegger's philosophy and Daseinsanalysis, which goes in other terms by existential psychotherapy. Currently, she practices as a psychologist. She's a fellow of the American Psychological Association, APA, the College of Counselling Psychologists, Australian Psychological Society. She also lectures at the Department of Psychology, Macquarie University, and is an adjunct fellow of the university. She counsels individuals and families on a range of mental health issues, including personal growth, meditation, and mindfulness. Moving into her other activities, especially her broad activities under the umbrella of psychology, Dr. Khong serves on the editorial boards of the Humanistic, Psychologist, and Mindfulness journals. I think they are published by APA, I guess. Her practice and research interests include integrating Western and Eastern approaches to psychology, health, and well being, which is going to be a very interesting intersection today. And she has published extensively in these areas. She was the guest editor of several special issues on mindfulness, Buddhist psychology, and Heidegger's philosophy. In 2021, which was this year, she guest edited a special double issue on revisiting and re envisioning mindfulness, Buddhist and contemporary perspectives for the humanistic psychologist, wherein which she combined, I guess, scholarly monks, scholars, practitioners into a sort of a different dimension in psychological aspects of mindfulness. Dr. Kong conducts talks and training workshops on psychotherapy, meditation, and mindfulness in Australia and overseas. For more of her work and publications, please visit her website at www.belindakhong.com. Number folks, you can actually take a look at the description of YouTube video, whereby you can click on that to see her more information about, I guess, her academic activities and her other activities. Okay, so Dr. Belinda, welcome to our discussion today. I'm very pleased to welcome you one more time.
Thank you, Bhante, and thank you for the
How's your
time.
morning going so far? In Sydney.
I'm sorry.
How's your morning going so far?
So far, it's good, and I join you, Bhante, in welcoming lots of people from different time zone in the world, different time. Some of my friends and colleagues are getting up very early. I'm not even sure where they are or
Yeah,
what time they are, and my family are joining us and different colleagues. So thank you for this opportunity.
yeah, you're welcome. I think I found the right person, especially to talk about mindfulness from two aspects, and then looking at mindfulness, in a very innovative context. So that's really interesting. Dr. Belinda, let me kind of create a kind of a background.
Bhante, could you speak a little bit louder for me, please?
Okay,
Thank you.
let
Yeah,
me sort of introduce kind of a background, kind of a thing to our discussion.
of
Now,
course, yes.
mindfulness is such a very popular term and a practice across the globe. and it's no doubt. And we're not going to talk about the normal things which people know in their everyday life. As many put mindfulness into their definition, mindfulness is the psychological process of feeling present in our bodies by paying attention to the moments, to the thoughts, to the feelings, and to environment around us. So by we know that we are greatly able to manage our anxiety, stress type of things, and depression. But let me highlight a couple of the things in your introduction which
Mm-hmm.
you innovatively brings up, which might be the kind of the crux of this discussion. And you exponentially talk about that mindfulness should not be limited to a kind of an intervention technique or a method.
That's right. Yes.
It could be, but we have to go beyond those
That's right. Yes.
interventions, techniques, and methods. And you also bring up that uh, the idea of mindfulness, whether it is an English term, it
Mm-hmm.
has been largely, uh, you know, uh, I would say, gone into kind of a corporate world in terms of commodification, and then it has been highly, commodified for different reasons.
Absolutely.
Because they think that it could be a kind of a quick fix or kind of a panacea for
That's
uh,
right.
you know small to large issues in the mental health. And at the same time, you are bringing up something to think about from Buddhism. Now, Buddhism is more about alleviating. The teachings are more about alleviating suffering, but psychology and psychotherapy and psychiatric, world, they are looking at getting rid of, I would say, mental health problems, kind of a solution.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And finally, I mean, we're going to be looking at these intersections in great details as we talk about. And finally, you are bringing up something really interesting. You are saying that we have to look at kind of a complementary practice of mindfulness.
That's right.
Mindfulness has to be complemented by other great virtues from Buddhism, and you
That's right.
particularly called dana, generosity, katanyuta, and you don't call it katanyuta, but gratitude,
Mm-hmm. Right.
garva, I would say respect, karuna, I would say compassion, and sila,
That's right.
virtue. So a healthy mindfulness practice for the uh, I would say for the whole world uh, could entail these additional complementary practices so that it would
Absolutely.
be a great
Abs-
practice.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you the first question this way. Now, as we know, mindfulness has been very popular, and it has been popularized. It has been popularizing even at this point. So, what do you think about, I would say, reasons or causes or conditions that have led mindfulness to be this popular in the past, now, and will be in the future?
I think that's a very interesting question. And Apante, a recent search that I made on Google highlighted not only 1 million, 2 million, the items on Google, if you type in the word mindfulness, came out with 240 million. 240 million items on mindfulness websites, blogs, items, and all that. So the popularity itself, I think, is because people are hungry for something that doesn't involve medication, that doesn't involve a lot of side effects, but at the same time also give them a sense of well-being. As a result of that popularity, then everybody, jumps on the bandwagon. And so a lot of people just put the word mindful. I see mindful cushion, mindful yoga, mindful this and mindful that, as if it is a catch-all. So the popularity itself is both because people looking for something that is very helpful, but also people don't understand it, and so they jump on the bandwagon.
Do you specifically identify, uh, I mean, the conditions, surrounding conditions for the popularity of mindfulness in the past. I would say the last 50 years. Let's take past 50 years, and the time that we are experiencing everything at the moment with the COVID-19
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm. Right.
the future of mindfulness trends. Do you think that there are commonalities or dissimilarities of the trends?
Sorry, are you saying there's commonality in the popularity in contemporary practice and traditional
Um,
Buddhist practice?
Yeah, my question is, now we are talking about the conditions that have led
Mm,
mindfulness to popularize.
mm-hmm.
So there there could be some common places, in those conditions, and probably not. So have you ever
Mm-hmm.
found out any differences or similarities of these trends, or uh, such?
Right. I think there are commonalities because, first of all, we're all human beings. So I think whether West, East, or anywhere, we all want to be happy. We want to be well. And I think thanks largely to people like John Kabat-Zinn and other mindfulness teachers in the West, they have brought mindfulness into the Western society and contemporary society through stress reduction and mindfulness based approaches, right? So suddenly I think the world begins to see mindfulness as part of an overall way of being, of getting better without necessarily seeing it as religion. So I think that accounts for its popularity. And because they then go into education, into public policy, mental health, a lot of things, corporate world and everything. Now that itself is both a value and assets and both a risk. And I think that's why Pante, when I guess edited the double issue by inviting people from both sides of the field, sanghas, very experienced teachers, and also the contemporary practitioners, to see what is the differences. And if you're asking me where the condition why it gives a rise, it's because I think there's a lot of suffering, more emotional, physical, mental suffering. So that condition makes it ripe. Plus, I think the world is also learning more about Buddhist practice through His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He's he promotes a lot of mindfulness through the scientific field. So people are beginning to see that actually there is a lot of contemporary issues that it could be used for. Now, on the other side of the balance sheet, mindfulness get a lot of publicity, right? They then be seen as the only thing that the Buddha teaches, and then they forget the other things that actually supports the practice. So that is the downside, and this is the thing that I'm very concerned about.
Overall, are you happy about the changes to mindfulness over the time? Do you think they are positive things that should happen depending on, differences happening every, uh, you know, uh, decade? For example, I would say with the COVID-19, people have been probably asked to think about, probably revisit about their mindfulness practice because they have a lots of jobs. Uh, you know, Probably there are a lot of domestic violence kind of stuff. They were isolated unexpectedly. So, I mean, do you think that we can be happy to see the changes, or changes have to be happen uh, on a par with the ancient teachings? I mean, this is the next question I'm going to actually come at.
Can you repeat the question,
Okay.
Pante?
Okay, so the changes happening, the conditions happening to mindfulness
Mm-hmm.
do have trends over time. So these
Mm-hmm.
changes could be a kind of a desideratum to people's mental health. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the kind of trends that we had back in 70s, probably at the time Dr. Kabat Singh introduced those therapies, are not kind of trends that could be in the 21st century.
Right.
So I think in a way we can be happy because now mindfulness has to take shape of the people's lives
That's right.
as time goes by, right?
That's
Okay,
right.
yeah, great. In his work, Why Buddhism is True, Professor Robert Wright, Yale professor and the New York bestseller book, uh, he mentions many insights about mindfulness, both in
Mm-hmm.
Asia and in the West. I listened to one of his talks a couple months ago, and he was talking
Sorry,
to
can you give me the name of the author again, Bhante?
Robert Wright, Why
Robert. Yeah.
Buddhism is True. And
Yes.
in his talk
Mm-hmm.
to Asia Society in the United
Mm-hmm.
States, he was mentioning about a clear difference between how the mindfulness practice is being practiced by both Easterners and the Westerners. I mean,
Right.
probably we can't gauge the same thing, but he has noticed. Now, in the West, I would say most of the people who like Buddhism, even in Australia, I guess, uh, they are more into mindfulness meditation, but maybe not with the complementary things that you suggest in your double, what you call double special issue.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they might not practice dana the way that it was supposed to be. They might not practice other complementary things, but there is a clear distinction. The distinction is in the West, most of the so-called self-identified or not identified people practice kind of a meditation. uh, I mean, they think that plays a bigger role in their life if
That's right.
they really into Buddhism. But in the East, there are people who practice meditation, but they are more likely serious meditators who want to practice samatha or vipassana
That's right.
in an attempt to attain nibbana, probably.
That's right.
Other people
That's right.
might think we cannot secularize meditation. Probably this mindfulness concept from the West has been popular in an attempt to understand this Eastern meditation, and then they thought that we can customize this to the needs of the West.
That's right. I
So
think I think it's an excellent label, customizing it.
okay, so I mean, this happens even to yoga, right? Because in yoga,
That's right.
you don't
That's right.
you don't see the original yoga that we see in the books of Patanjali and all these Hindu philosophers in the modern yoga in the West, but they have stripped out some of the things to make it more,
That's
I
right.
would say, familiarize with the Western people. And our point is not to look at the Western people, looking at this healthy perspective for the both Westerners and the
That's right.
Easterners.
That's right.
So now let's move on to.
Sorry, Pante, can I jump in here?
Yeah, sure.
I think uh, when I like to talk about it, I talk more about the contemporary practice.
Mhm.
It's not unique to the West that we have these concerns, this misconception, and all that. I think a lot of the practitioners, even in Asia and everywhere else, right, when they actually coming to mindfulness from, I call, a contemporary secular perspective, there is a lot of the Buddha's teachings called Dhamma that is actually missing. And if I could maybe start here, the conversation I have with Chief Reverend Dhammapariyesanā from Malaysia, he's the chief abbot, right? And he actually started and informed the whole approach to the double issue. So I said to him, Chief, and we all call him Chief because it's an affectionate term. I said, Chief, why is there now so much popularity of mindfulness in contemporary society? And why is there so much concern about it and so much misunderstanding? And Chief said that actually, from a Buddhist perspective, the Buddha talks about the three pillars: dana, which is generosity; sila, ethics, morality; and bhavana, which is consists of meditation and mindfulness. But they form a triangle. So this is what I call the supportive practice, right? And Chief said all these are actually intended to be practiced holistically so that people can actually not just meditate and calm themselves down, but they also then learn that they need to be generous, practice compassion, practice right action, right thoughts, the Eightfold Path, and things like that. But Chief said, unfortunately, in contemporary society, especially in the West, they have taken only bhavana. Not even bhavana. They haven't even taken right concentration. Right? They've just taken mindfulness, not even right mindfulness. Right? So it's a very, very little bit of the Buddha's teaching. And that's why there is a lot of concerns, because people, after a while, my biggest concern about the current practice is that it can become very self-focused, very self-individualistic. My pain, my suffering, my breath, my difficulty to get into this, the personal pronoun become even stronger. Whereas the whole practice that the Buddha is encouraging is to go beyond the individual self, the individual problem, by practicing compassion and generosity and things like that. Right? So my biggest issue with people not understanding where the practice comes from and not understanding the Buddha's teaching is that they actually become quite self-focused in their practice.
I think you open up this answer to the second question, actually. Now, can you delineate a little bit about what are some of the important differences between the mindfulness practices in Buddhist and contemporary society? Now, I think I brought up something before at the intersection of Easterners and Westerners. And what do you think that the both, maybe either party, either section, is lacking in the mindfulness that you suggest, looking at the complementary things like dana, sila, bhavana, I would say generosity, virtue, and I think you translate this to be cultivating the mind kind of part. And
Right.
we should also talk about right mindfulness, because you brought that up very nicely, because we have something called samma sati, right mindfulness, and miccha sati, wrong mindfulness. And we will
That's
get
right.
into that at the end of your answer. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So what are the peculiar things, or I would say differences between uh, the ancient and, I would say, uh, let's take Buddhism, the Buddhist and the contemporary mindfulness
Right.
practice.
So to just give you a very simple example, Bhante, I think that we are all mindful. If we're not mindful, we will be dead. For example, if you cross the road and you're not mindful of the oncoming traffic, right? You'll be running into the traffic. So mindfulness is just being aware, being present. And this is how the modern understanding of mindfulness is the present moment, being there, being present. And that's fine. That is very important. But the Buddha does not just talk about being aware. He talks about right mindfulness. You got to be aware of the right action, the right thoughts, right? So the cultivation of stealing your mind and calming yourself is to see what is the right action here, what is needed here, right? Not just, you know, I need to be aware. Okay, so for example, if you were eating food, for example, you are aware you're eating. But if the Buddha would probably have to, I mean, this is a very simple example. With right mindfulness, they will say, maybe I'm already full. Maybe I don't need to eat so much. You actually have to apply your mind, calm down, and see what is needed in every situation. Now, that I find is actually absent in the modern contemporary practice. A lot of practitioners say that, they promote that. I'm not saying this is the true of everybody, but there's not enough emphasis on samasati, right. Right means skillful, right? So it's not just being mindful. I am We are mindful all the time, but is it right mindfulness? And this is where the ethical issues are. Would I do this? Should I do this? Is it skillful to do this? That is missing from the contemporary practice. Does
So
that make
my
sense?
yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
asking a follow-up question now.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why do you think in the West this skillful part kind of missing? Is it because the Western society does not emphasize about the virtue? Because in the West there is a huge this I would say I me myself personality or mentality, not because that they are doing something wrong. Ways and means how they have been actually growing up and evolving could be kind of this looking at oneself first, and then if they have time left, they're going to look at other people, but they are doing that too very well. So now the problem is in Buddhism, Buddha talks about, I would say, mindfulness with a focus on uh, looking at one's own aggregates. I mean,
That's
don't
right.
call
That's
oneself
right.
to be an entity, a permanent entity,
That's right.
so
That's
that
right.
you are not constructing unnecessary events with other people. And somebody
That's
is
right. That's right.
bad to me, and I have to think about that. There was no person who was angry, and there was no person that I should call myself who was attacked by the criticized
That's right.
by
That's
that
right.
person. So the
That's
problem is
right.
over. But this
Yeah,
is
you
not
don't
how things happen.
personalize the problem.
Yeah, personalized. So we have to always depersonalize many events, as many as possible. So okay, that's one thing. So in Samma Sati, now this is a part of the Noble Eightfold Path
Mm-hmm.
that directly leads to the peace, calmness, I would say, finally, the sansaric, extinction of the samsara, or the crossing of the samsara, nibbana.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Samma Sati, as you know, is not a standalone practice as well. Now, even in the Noble Eightfold Path, for those folks who don't understand the Buddhist fundamentals, I would say, now this Noble Eightfold Path is the only solution to get rid of the problems, especially the emotional suffering. So it has been labeled by three categories. So the first two to be part of the Panya, Samma Ditti, Samma Sankappa, that means uh, right view and then right intention. They are part of the Panya part, wisdom part. And
That's right.
Vacha Kammanta Ajiva, Samma Vacha, Samma Kammanta, Samma Ajiva. That means I would say right speech and right action and right living. They are part of the Sila virtue. And the
That's
rest
right.
of the tree, Samma Vayama, Samma Sati, Samma Sama. Samma Vayama means right effort, Samma Sati means right mindfulness, Samma Samadhi means right concentration. So they are leading to the Samadhi part. Samadhi part is the end of the Sati, because Sati leads to Samadhi, concentration. Even at that point, Buddha distinguishes a Micha Samadhi, wrong Samadhi, which was a practice by the pre-Buddhist sages, ascetics. Now, their fundamental motive was to do the same practice we call samatha, but their aim was to only to tapping into a bliss,
That's right.
eternal bliss.
That's
But the
right.
problem Buddha saw was that that bliss can expire anytime. So it is also subject to change, anicca. So Buddha asks
That's
us
right.
to get into some level of samatha and then do a detour. I would say shift your focus into vipassana. So that's a fundamental thing that Dhamma folks might not know. So that's a kind of a difference. So now this is an interesting question to you actually. Now, if Buddha were to live with us now, Shakyamuni Buddha or whoever, what would you think? Would the Buddha recognize this
Mm.
contemporary practice of mindfulness? Because how would
Actually, yeah, that's a very good question. And you should actually ask my grandson, Nicholas and Matthew, who I hope they're still listening in, because I've been teaching them meditation for a long time. And every time we talk about, they love the stories about the stories that the Buddha tells, the Jakarta tales and all that. And recently, Matthew and I are starting to write a book on what would the Buddha say if this problem presents, right? And they have been, they and I have been trying to apply all the stories into the modern contemporary problems that their friends face. So the young people, I feel, can see actually the Buddha's teachings in their lives more clearly than what I would call the middle generation, the millennials. Now, back to your question, would the Buddha recognize his teachings today? Some of it, yes, Bhante. Most of it, no. Right? For example, I think the Buddha would probably have a concern about the way mindfulness has been commercialized. They call it mindfulness, right? Very quick, short courses, people go in, and I get a lot of psychologists ask me that and says, can you teach me to do mindfulness? And I say, do you have a personal practice? No. Do you know anything about the Buddha's teachings? No. So why do you want to actually uh, incorporate mindfulness in your psychotherapy? Oh, because it is the flavor of the month. It's like a new curry. So they want to incorporate it to put it on their CV. Now, I think the Buddha would have a lot of problems with people using the word mindfulness to actually self-promote, right? And commercialize it, and then they don't have a practice. They go to a weekend workshop 2 days. They put themselves as expert in mindfulness, and they go out and help their clients. Very dangerous, risky, right? So I think the Buddha would have a concern. He himself, spent so many years, looking at his practice and all that. Secondly, the type of research that is being made about mindfulness, it's all scientific based, and they're good. They're helpful, like that His Holiness said, if the science can help us see what is meditation, that's fine. But now everything has to be evidence based, right? You got to have neuroscience. You got to see what your brain is. And I remember going at a conference where the scientists and the researchers were showing His Holiness pictures of the brain. And they said, oh, Your Holiness, when the person is angry, the brain, this side lights up red, right? And this is what we find, right? And His Holiness, he's very, very sharp, he bowed and he said, why did the people get angry in the first place? None of the researchers could answer that. So the point I'm making is that the Buddha teaches us to understand about the mind. The modern day science about mindfulness is about the brain. That is a big difference, right? You count and they measure your brains, and they put FRI functioning and all that. The Buddha would say, why are you putting all this machine? Why don't you ask them? So the Buddha, I think, would find it hard to recognize the science, the scientific model of the mindfulness, when to him, the whole of his teaching, the Dhamma, is experiential. He says, know it for yourself, right? So I think that's the second point I think that the Buddha would find very difficult to understand. Why is it that we don't get in touch with the person who is actually living this life, the experiential part? And then I think thirdly, and this is probably not the Buddha but me, the way that is being used in psychotherapy and in counseling and in all that, I have a lot of concerns about that. Because the therapists of them are not well trained, right? They probably, as I said, they only do short courses. They don't have a personal practice. They don't understand the foundation on which mindfulness is grounded on, like dana, sila, compassion, and all that. All they see is this particular, it becomes a technique. It becomes very instrumental. So as a result of that, they do not know who and what population to use the practice with. For example, I counsel a lot of clients on a range of issues: PTSD, psychotherapy, depression, anxiety, but also psychopathology, right? Schizophrenia and all that. Now, with people with serious mental health issues, I would never allow them to do concentration meditation, watching their breath, because it's very hard for them to differentiate the mind states that's created by the psychopathology and the mind states that are created by samadhi or the concentration. So I ask them to just do practice that practices gratitude, compassion, and gratefulness, right? The sila part of it. So if you're a therapist that don't understand the whole range of the Buddha's teachings, especially the Eightfold Path, you could actually cause a lot of damage. And the Buddha would say that is very unskillful. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a great sense actually. Um, yeah, so I think that leads to, I mean, this conversation leads to the next question about the contemporary application of mindfulness with regard to its challenges. I would say things like limitations, challenges, and opportunities, for the mindfulness subject. So, as you said, that there are some areas that have to be addressed, especially the lack of proper training, especially with the context of this complementary practice, as we see in the spiritual practice, especially in Buddhism. And also, you were kind of vocal about how people use the qualifications, certificates, and the knowledge of mindfulness to be self-promoted. So that's another thing, because it's a very famous subject, because anybody can personalize this thing. So it is because they only think that a certain practice, certain technical practice, does what they want, and they do not know that this has to be practiced is sila, done, and all that. So if they know that,
That's right.
they might
That's
not
right.
cheat on what they really have. They might not lie to other people, right? Where in which we can see things like Mac mindfulness and all these new concepts have been coined. So, Dr. Belinda, what do you think about some of the ways and means we can develop a better mindfulness practice, especially because you particularly mentioned in your book that what you call your double uh, issue is actually more on a conceptual kind of a approach, conceptual perspective, rather than an updated mindfulness kind of a analysis. So if you say so, then I understand that what you're trying to say is that you looking at with your writers looking at a kind of a better holistic practice with mindfulness with
That's
some
right.
suggested teachings, right?
That's
So
right.
now I wanted to ask you that what do you think those teachings, those conceptual framework that you espouse, and with your writers, their interviews and other scholars, do to overcome challenges, I would say limitations, and to better support the developments in mindfulness. Let's talk about what are limitations in the contemporary mindfulness, and then we'll
Okay.
move on to challenges and suggested recommendations for developing the existing practice.
Okay. I think that Pante, this will probably not go down very well. But I guess I'm too old not to be controversial. But I think the first thing, the limitations, is that the teachers, the mindfulness teachers, and I don't want to talk about West or East, I think it applies across the board. The teachers, the facilitators, the people who actually profess to teach meditation or promote meditation themselves must not only be trained properly, they must actually examine their own intentions and motivation, right? And I think Bhante Dhamma, who is one of the contributors in his article, right, talk about this a lot, right? And for example, Bhante Dhamma, his article is called "Selling Water by the River," right? And Pante talks about the commercialization. It concerns all the authors in the special issue, especially him, because he says that the Dharma meditation was offered to these facilitators free of charge, and just through donation. But now they're charging a lot of money, right? And that's fine. I think Bhante accepts that people have to make a living, right? And especially when you're doing it as an occupation. But Bhante was wondering, from the teacher's point of view, can they actually role model a way of teaching mindfulness and all these things free of charge, or at least through donation, so that what the teachers have to do is to embody the practice? What is happening now is they teach mindfulness, they don't live mindfully. They do not actually practice all the other principles of generosity and all that. So the first thing what I would say is the limitation is a lot of people are divorcing the technique from the rest of their lives, and it is not possible, right? So there's one big limitation. I think the second limitation is, you know, Monday, I ask people, if you were to go to a workshop for 3 days, 4 days, even 6 months, to go and do surgery, would you go and operate on your mother? And they said no. And I said, then why are you teaching this practice when you yourself don't have the grounding? So I think that the facilitators themselves need to lower their ego, right? And be humble enough to say, I am only beginning to know this, right? So that's the other limitation, is that people see it as the flavor, right? And that, I think, is really undermining the whole practice, because the whole practice of the Buddha's teaching is get away from your own ego. And thirdly, I think that there's not enough allowance given, that all of us as human beings want to follow more of its not religious but a spiritual path of giving back. I think a lot of the people who teach us is underestimate that a lot of people actually want more out of this practice. So, so I think it's the facilitators not understanding it, but also thinking that, oh, I cannot talk about the Dharma, I cannot talk about the Buddha. Why? Oh, because they might be Christian, they might be Muslim. I said, the Dharma is a universal law. Do you know what I mean? So it's the teachers themselves being frightened of being seen to be unscientific. So there's a lot of limitation starting from, I said, the teachers themselves. So basically, the teachers have to get out of the way.
What would somebody ask a question that original teachings are these? You are
Sorry?
strip. Somebody may ask a question that whose original teachings are these that you are saying? I mean, from
Mhm.
somebody who is teaching mindfulness by stripping out the original names of those teachers, right? I mean, people might say that I don't want to talk about Buddha. Then people might think that I'm indoctrinating you,
Yep.
which is not a
Yes.
good thing in the West. So, what would you think that what could be a good way, healthy way for them to operate? I mean, Dhamma is universal, which is of
Yeah.
course no doubt. But
Right.
how can someone teach mindfulness by attributing its right ownership to the right person, in this case, the Buddha?
Right. I
Uh,
think that's a very good question, Pante. And I wouldn't limit it to mindfulness. I would limit it to Dharma,
yeah,
which is that thing. Right. For example, I see a lot of people who are referred by doctors to me for medical, people with terminal illness and with medical issues, health issues, and all that. I don't even talk about the Buddha or anything. I don't even talk about. So, for example, when I am teaching them, I have a client who was diagnosed with cancer. Okay, and she's very stressed, and she's waiting for the results. So she came in wanting to learn to lower her stress. So I was helping her with the meditation practice and all that. And then I say to her, can you give me a number of your stress? at this point, after she said for about 30 minutes. I said, 1 out of 10, what is your level of stress? She says, oh, about 3. Okay. And I said, are there any dialogue? She said, no. And I said, okay, now I want you to put all the dialogue that you've just given me 10 minutes ago, which is, what happens if the diagnosis is bad? What happens if I die? My children are young, and all the things that brought her to therapy, right? So I said, okay, you put all this dialogue in there. She did. I said, now give me what is your stress level? It went to 9, right? And I said, what happened? You haven't even moved out of your chair, right? Nothing has changed in this environment. There's no condition that went from 3 to 9. And then the penny dropped. And she said, Belinda, it's my mind. My mind is introducing the stress, right? And I'm creating the mental suffering for myself. So she said, where does that come from? So I said, this is what the Buddha teaches. That the mind is also the path to our suffering and also the path out of our suffering. And things changes. I said in the last half hour, nothing has changes except your mind. She says, I want to know more. Now that is because I know about the Dhamma, and because, I could introduce that from a very practical, ordinary level. And when the people show an interest, I said, well, this is what's happening. It's about impermanence, about change. Don't have to talk about the Buddha. Don't have to, so that's why I said it is the teachers that have to be skillful, have to understand how to bring it to the common people. And in the West, they are so scared of the word religion, right? They are into woke. You can have gender issues, you can have all kinds of issues, but you cannot talk about religion. Like it's a bad word. Why? So the teachers need to understand and actually question their own motivation. Does that make
So
sense?
yeah, as you suggest, there are healthy ways to
That's right.
make a framework,
That's right.
of treating patients and those people who really want to be blessed with the mindfulness. I mean, there could be some fears about mentioning the names like Buddha and other people, but they can, of course, incorporate a complete practice, a complete, I would say, approach taken out of the Buddhist practice. Like as you said, you know, the patient said that I'm better, so she wants to know more. I mean, that means that you have properly incorporated that into that particular incident, right?
That's
Uh,
right. Because
yeah,
she could experience the changes and the impermanence of her mind and how her internal dialogue created the suffering. And this is the practice in 5 minutes, right? And it's
right.
powerful. Don't need to measure her brains.
Yeah, that's really nice to hear from somebody like you. I mean, you are a consulting psychologist. I mean, I know that you are a Buddhist actually since then, but you know how to incorporate them properly without marring the essence, and also the respecting the indoctrination kind of things too. That's really
That's
good.
right.
So people are sometimes a sandwich between indoctrination and gratitude.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so this
Absolutely.
leads to the next question. Yeah, do you have anything to add, Belinda?
So what I want to say on the flip side,
Yeah,
the Sangha side, the Buddhist side, right? I've been approached by many chief abbots and Sangha to say that unfortunately some monks do not understand contemporary issues, right? So whenever they get somebody, a devotee that asks them for some help, they do not know how to understand the psychological part of it. All they do is they quote the Buddhist teaching. Oh, suffering is universal. Like, but you know, so I've been asked many times to actually help to train monks, especially the young monks, about actually how to listen, how to communicate, and how to actually make the Buddha's teachings very common sense. So I think both community has a role to play, Bhante,
yeah,
right? To bring the Dharma into everyday life, but also not to use the Dharma anything to apply to everything.
Yeah,
right? Without
seriously speaking, one of the misconceptions a lot of, I mean, so-called people, I'm not saying, not even the monastics, some monastics, I mean, because what they were told at the beginning of their life was, spiritual life was that you are carrying the greatest, the pristine, universal message of the Buddha. So everything has to come under that thing. And so that they won't see that there is a kind of a strategizing, practical, interventional probably ways of putting that message. So over time what is happening is that this concept of superiority,
that's right.
that kind of a complexity can grow. This is
That's
because
right.
most of us are wordlings.
That's
But
right.
the thing is that if you know what you want to talk, you should be able to, I mean, for those folks, find out better ways to put into the action. I mean, this is
That's right.
this
That's
is
right.
the thing that is really important. Belinda, let's move on to the next important question that is really interesting. Now, as we know, Buddhist thoughts of mindfulness is already there. I mean, more or less in many other in many practices of mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, this mindfulness, the Western concept of mindfulness, is very prevalent. Is actually very extended in every places in the world. Probably that is more popular than the Buddhist, this fundamental idea of Buddhist mindfulness. Do you
That's
think
right.
that probably the people who teach mindfulness from Buddhism does not deliver it in a better way to address the contemporary mindfulness? Probably this might be something that even the Buddhist teachers might need to learn some, because they need to catch up with the trends of
That's right.
mindfulness. That
That's
that's
right.
something. I mean, textually speaking, actually, it's a nice, great masterpiece. I mean, the Buddhist texts, early Nikayas, and all the Abhidhamma. It's all about
That's right.
mind
Mm-hmm.
and the conscious. Because in Buddhism, we don't call a mind; we have minds, consciousnesses, not one mind. It's Western psychology. There is the mind.
That's right.
So, don't you think that? I mean, uh, while the contemporary teachers have to train their disciples, students very well with more training and whatever the expertise, don't you think that the Buddhist teachers? I mean, no, I'm not talking every Buddhist teacher. There are very good
Mm-hmm.
Buddhist teachers too. As a thought that this Buddhist way of practicing mindfulness has to be taught, has to be delivered in a better way, especially to this millennia.
Absolutely, Ante, and I agree. That's why I said both communities have a lot to learn from each other, right? But I think at the moment there is a lot of fear, a lot of misunderstanding, because a lot of people still in the contemporary secular sector see religion as a bad word. And then you get the monastic that says, don't be frightened, right? But they need to find a common language, a common discourse to show, why is it, whether it's religious or spiritual, is a human problem. And I think that His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, is very good at that. He talks to the scientific community, right? He has no problem with getting them to examine his brains and all that. And then he very, very skillfully said, how about this? Right? So he has not lowered, he's expanded the understanding. So just to give an example, now in the West now especially, there's a lot of research on compassion, right? Gratitude. It's gone beyond uh, meditation, the effect of meditation and mindfulness. It's actually, they're
We
now
just
looking
to,
at
just to
research.
interrupt you,
Yeah,
we not only have compassion kind of books, we have radical compassion kind of books too.
that's right. So
Just
so
go
now
down to,
they're
yeah,
doing research on
yeah.
that, right? And seeing what the impact on compassion is on the mind and the brain.
Mm.
And Dr. Richard Davidson tells of a story where he does a lot of research with His Holiness at the University of Madison, Wisconsin. And he said that His Holiness said to him, "You are very good at looking at how meditation and mindfulness help people with depression and anxiety. Have you ever thought of using the same research to look at applying positive states, compassion and generosity? Can you look at the effect?" Right? So His Holiness is very skillful in saying, please don't keep looking at negative problems. How about looking at positive things, right? So Richard Davidson has actually does a lot of research now on the impact of the brain when you are compassionate, when you're generous. And apparently they're finding that the brain lights up in blue and things like that. Now, my concern about that is I don't really need the science to tell me that when I'm compassionate and grateful, I'm happier, right? Yeah. So what I'm saying is I think the bridge between the scientific community, especially in the West, and the bridge between the monastic community, right, is to actually get out there and help people to apply to common day problems. So that the monastic is not seen to be in the ivory tower of the Buddha's teaching, and neither is the scientific people seen in the lab, right? And Pante, that's why I'm so grateful that a platform like yours, the things that you do, is that bridged. For you and me to be discussing this, is that bridged?
Yeah, sounds really good. Yeah, but the thing is, this coexistence is not happening very much in many uh,
Right.
platforms, because spiritual people want to go their way, scientists want to go their way. So there's kind of not that coexistence. But I
So
think
how do
now,
you think we can resolve this, Pante?
yeah, good question. I think we should not separate these two. I think we have to learn out of these two, not keeping, like, see what happened when the pandemic hits everybody of us. A lot of people, they think, okay, science is nothing now. See what happened. The whole world was down because of something, and then after a couple of years, we are booming a little bit because of recovering because of vaccinations, and people who said so, they are thinking now differently. So we have to understand. Buddhism is something that predominantly talks about how to get out of the suffering, and also some of the secular teachings. Science is actually looking at any question through a evidence based system. So we have to learn many things out of these two, and then to combine to something to solve a problem. So I think that is what we have to espouse in our discourse. Because now, if you take a country where Buddhism is primarily rooted, uh, there is a tendency that people don't believe in science at some point. Now, everything spiritual, religious should be really working out towards us. And on the other hand, if you take any other country in the West, they might not believe in. A large number of people might not believe in the spiritual, especially religious stuff. So I think these are two groups of people who might think differently by attaching to one or the other. So I think they have to sort of go in tandem. That's what I think. As a monastic, I think that we have to, we have to consider scientific, you know, findings. We are not saying that we have to only accept scientific findings over the Buddhist teachings. We have to
That's right.
look at, probably we can sort of testify what we already know. I mean, there may be people who might not believe in a hell or a heaven until the NASA might find out. But I mean,
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah,
we have to go beyond that kind of a public discourse.
that's right.
Okay, Belinda, my last question to you is that now we've been talking about mindfulness, it's contemporary mindfulness. That's why we looked at Buddhism. Uh, how, I mean, mindfulness is of course a good thing. I mean, although it has been commodified, used by many people
But it's
to an
only
extent.
one of eight factors per day.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Yeah,
true. I mean, but other factors were not that much popular,
that's
uh,
right.
as mindfulness. But probably this mindfulness has to have the other factors too, because
That's
we
right.
know in this sutta called Maha Chattarisaka Sutta Majjhima Nikaya, Buddha says every factor in the Noble Eightfold Path has to be practiced with three supporting factors: Samma Ditti, Samma Vayama, Samma Sati. Right view, right effort, and right mindfulness. Because let's say you practice Samma Sankalpa, right intention. How do you figure out this is right, this is wrong? Through Samma Ditti. Then you need energy to practice it. So you need Sammavaya. At the same time, how you particularly know that this is not the right intention? It is by bringing up the supervisor, which we call by Sammasati. That means Sammasati
That's right.
is
That's
not
right.
a, again one more time, it's not a standalone practice, but I mean, if we put this Buddhist flavor, I mean, all these things into this, I mean, you can again sort of explain to us as a final thing, the Buddhist, integration into mindfulness. How can this mindfulness, contribute to this larger, broader world in this millennia, especially in more meaningful ways to people's lives, without keeping it as a commodity or a kind of a commercial corporate thing? I mean, they might be blessed, they might be benefited, but how do we bring this discussion to a healthier kind of a holistic kind of a environment in the next couple of decades or in the century?
I think that's an excellent question, Ante. How can we make the practice of mindfulness more meaningful to society and to suffering individuals, right? I think based on our discussion, we can see that it cannot be used as a standalone technique. It cannot be used as uh, very instrumental. It has to be a lived thing. It has to be embodied. It has to be practiced. But I think more importantly, Ante, it has to be practiced alongside generosity, gratitude, respect, and ethics. I think that is what is so missing and so very disconcerting in society today, right? We have a lot of rights in society, but we don't take a lot of responsibility, right? And the Buddha's emphasis is on responsibility, right? And that rights and responsibility must coexist. So being mindful, like you said, you got to think, okay, what is the right action here, right? And not all actions are right. Just because you're mindful doesn't mean that it is the right action. So we have to practice gratefulness. We have to practice kindness. All the virtues that are supportive of the practice is not is not inculcated in mindfulness. You know what you become? You become a person who is walking around, that goes around saying my pain, my anxiety, my suffering. It becomes even more. It becomes a personal egoistical practice, whereas it should be taken out of that, right? So I'm hoping that the whether it's the monastic and or the practitioners, the psychologists, or things like that, you know, after the person has actually sit there for half an hour, I would say to them, please go out and sweep the leaf, right? Please go out and water the plants. The mindful my grandson does that. You know, they after that they will go, like for example, my grandson was very concerned about, for example, having a wasp in the house, and he was very concerned about being bitten, right? And I said to him, actually, the reason the wasp actually wants to bite you is because it's looking after its babies, right? So the mother wasp is very protective. So if you don't disturb it, the mother wasps will not catch you, right? And you just leave it alone. So then I heard him telling his friends, just respect the mother, just respect the wolf, right? And then they won't hurt you. You know what I mean? At a very, very simple level, Pante. We need more of this. We need less of the science. We need less of the research. We need to actually teach our children and our family that gratefulness helps, thankfulness helps. And I cannot emphasize this enough because, as I mentioned in my book, that at the end of each therapy session, when my clients are finishing therapy, I told them to select a list of charity to help, two or three, right? And I said to them, they must go out and help. That's part of my therapy, right? And some of them help with homelessness and orphans and all that, because it takes them out of their individual problem to understand that rather than this is my suffering, you understand the Buddha's teaching, there is suffering. So even if I don't mention the Buddha, to get them out there to practice this kind of thing, they will understand the suffering. They will understand dukkha, right? So I'm saying that the monastic themselves have to find ways to use contemporary language to actually get out there. And once we do that, I think we will not have this dichotomy between is this religious, is this Buddhist. It's just being human.
How do they use the contemporary language?
That's well, but first of all, to use contemporary language, you have to be very mindful of what's happening. Like with my grandchildren, I use the lesson he has about being frightened of the wolves, right? Be there,
So
right?
you are
They're scared.
suggesting them to catch up with the modern trends in mindfulness as well.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
also, Pante, to, I often say to Chief, and Chief wants me to train the monastic. Can you please train them how to listen without being involved in their own thought? Oh, this is dukkha, this is it. And I spend a lot of time training psychologists just how to listen. Listening, quiet listening is the hardest thing to do, right? So instead of saying, how can I teach, like a lot of monastic, how can I teach the children about the Buddha? I say, why are you teaching the children about Buddha? Why don't you see what the children are hating, right? If like my grandchildren wants to learn about wolves and things like that, go from where they are. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So we don't have to create or co-create another language. We just have to be open to what's happening and make sense of that situation to help them.
I wanted to spotlight another very interesting thing that you write here. That's
Mm-hmm.
pretty interesting. Now, one of the things that has been with the contemporary mindfulness is that it is only focus on self. Like somebody
Mm-hmm.
comes to see
Mm-hmm.
a psychologist, psychotherapist, or
Mm-hmm.
psychiatric person, and
Mm-hmm.
then she listens. She speaks to the particular person who has this
Mm-hmm.
expertise, and then she advises, gives expertise to that particular person. But you
Right.
are suggesting that this uh, perspective has to go beyond the self, and it has to address the social suffering somewhere in your article. And you are saying that if it is not the Buddhist practice, how it was actually the contemporary mindfulness practice that is being used by many, is actually only leveled down to a form of what do you call psychotechnology.
Yeah, psychotechnology.
That's something very interesting because you are trying to say that we have to shift our perspective after consulting, after helping the patient uh, into a social kind of help. Because, for example, I would say uh, somebody can make an argument that if everybody is okay, then the whole society is okay too. At the same
Right.
time, I mean, Buddhist mindfulness is always about social suffering as well, personal suffering and social suffering. So
That's
if we
right.
can use, the mindfulness teachings that we know in Buddhism, that can really help the both aspects, not only the self.
That's right. That's
Mhm.
right. And I think what the Buddha emphasizes is that the practice is relational, right? Is there's a connection, the interrelatedness with everybody. And there is a tendency, even without the practice, even in psychotherapy alone, there is a tendency, Bhante, to be very self-focused. I mean, like one of my clients says to me, Belinda, how many people would listen to me for an hour without interruption? How many people will be watching how I breathe, or how worried I am, or how sad I am? So it is, psychotherapy itself is a very self individually focused, right? And I find that most of my clients do not relapse, or at least have less relapse, is because they suddenly realize that a lot of their problem is they put themselves in the equation first. Me, mine, the personal pronoun, right? And what I try to do with them is to take them out of the equation, right? And I think this is what the Buddha is trying to teach. Right action, right livelihood, right, right thoughts, right view, right? So if you can understand that this is not just me, right, a lot of problems would go away, right? And so I think that it is very important in psychotherapy for the psychologists not to entrench the client in their own individual problem. And so we have to take from the individual to the social. Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
just at a very simple level, when I was in this building, I have a lot of doctors and medical professionals. It's a medical center. So the doctors all they said, oh, we want to learn meditation. So once a month, they all come into my office and they sit with me, right?
Mhm.
And then I conduct it free. And then the medical doctor says, oh, we want to pay you for your time. And I said, no need. The Dhamma is free. I'm happy to do this. Oh, no, no, no. We feel that we should pay you. Okay. And they go out every time. I ran it for 10 months, and every time they want to pay. So I said, okay, you go and take the $10 and you go and give it to charity that you like, and you don't even have to tell me. So start giving it away. So they did that. And then they feel still very bad. And I said, okay, the next exercise is I want you to do some kind of action that is out of appreciation without saying that you are giving it away. So I like you to think about it. Then I had a mutual client that said to me one day, oh, this Dr. So and so, is so kind. She didn't charge me for the visit that day because we're all on the same floor. And I said, what is the difference? He said, normally when I go to see the doctor, they'll ask me for my Medicare card, my private health fund card. And today she told me it's on the house. And she said, I've never heard that before. Now I knew that this is because the doctor is putting the gratitude, the mindfulness, the dana, the sila into her practice. And so later on, when I saw her, I said, how'd it go? He says, Belinda, that's very smart. You didn't tell me how to be generous. You just say to me, do something that nobody knows. It was so rewarding when I say to the patient, it's on the house. I can see her face light up. Now, isn't that a very, so I said to the doctor, yeah, because you have this practice, you don't have to find ways to practice generosity. You know what I mean? So we don't have to reinvent the wheel, Pate.
Mhm.
We can find within all our context and all our situation ways of doing it. But can you imagine the seed of Dharma that's planted from me to the doctors by saying I'm giving this free? The doctors planted into the patient, and I'm sure the patients will go home, you know, and do that. Now that is what I'm hoping society will do, and that's what I'm hoping that the practice of right mindfulness will do.
Great. With that, I wanted to ask you, what are your concluding remarks today?
Well, first of all, Pante,
Something to summarize very short.
yeah, I don't need to summarize, but I, as I said, I'm very grateful for you giving me this opportunity to articulate, to also present the rationale that's in the book from different authors. My concluding remark is I actually do not want anybody to practice mindfulness. I would like people just to be mindful. It's not a practice, it's a way of living, right? So that it doesn't become a technique. And for that, I think we have to start lowering this difference between us and them, West and East. But to do what the Dalai Lama says, we are all brothers and sisters. We are all human beings. Right? That was what I hope to see.
Thank you, Dr. Belinda Khong, and I'm very thankful for you to accept my invitation. Do you have anything that you think that you missed out on the discussion? You want to add anything that you think that you missed out on that?
Well, no, actually, I think we've covered uh, quite a lot.
Okay.
If people are interested, you've already given them quite a lot of the links.
Okay.
But maybe, Bhante, if there is a chance, and this is a question posed to me, would the audience be able to participate in future discussion because they might have questions? So I'll leave that to you to see how you maybe can create a platform where people who are interested in the subjects have questions that they could, maybe I don't know. You're very technologically very advanced, Bhante, so you might be able to find a way. But thank
Okay.
you for your Dana. Thank you for your
Thank you very
contribution.
much for coming and then sharing your beautiful insights that are not very commonplace to many of people who are watching the whole discussion. And thank you,
Thank you.
Dr.
Sadu.
Belinda,
Yeah.
actually Belinda, because I think it's very early morning for you. And at the same time, I want to thank everybody who watched today's discussion. We've been actually talking about exploring Buddhist and contemporary practices of mindfulness. In this, we were looking at some of the challenges, concerns, issues, some of the developmental conditions to the modern day mindfulness. And we also talked about how we can better present mindfulness through the lens of Buddhist teachings. And finally, I like how you summarize and you don't need to practice mindfulness, but be mindful. Let's be more, I would say, echoing and resonating with what we already know. Uh, I hope that if you're somebody who want to be a little bit serious, you probably meet a meditation teacher like Kamattanacharya, what we know. But for the general, mindful activities, just be mindful. This is what you said. Thank you again. Thank you, the
Thank
audience,
you,
and
Bhante.
yeah,
And good
we'll
night.
we'll see you all with another expert in a field, and we'll see you in a couple of moments. Thank you. Have a good day. Have a good
Thank you.
evening. Good night.
Sadu.